Wyoming Territory, April 1879, the wind cut sharp across the Cheyenne sale yard, dragging dust and shame through the crowd gathered under the hanging canvas. Men stood shoulder to shoulder, boots dug into the muddy ground from last night's storm, all eyes trained on the platform where a woman stood chin up, hands clenched at her sides, dress torn at the hem. She's 22, strong, no husband, and the debt her father left behind sits at $300, the auctioneer called out. The courts ruled she can pay it off through labor. 6 months, room and board, full contract. Who'll start the bidding? Harriet Sutton felt her belly twist. She had not cried when the notice was nailed on her door, nor when the bank man spat on her porch and told her she was worth less than the land she stood on. But now, with strangers sizing her up like cattle, her throat burned. Somewhere near the back, a voice called, $50. Another man shouted, $80. Harriet shut her eyes. Her father had died owing more than he ever told her. She had tried to keep the ranch running after he passed last winter, but the snow had been heavy and the cattle thin. Still, she had not expected this. She had no kin left, no neighbors willing to step in, just her and her debt. 90. Another man yelled. Do I hear 100? The auctioneer barked. Then came a voice low and steady, not loud but carrying clear through the noise. 150, he said. The crowd shifted. Harriet opened her eyes. He stood near the edge of the crowd, tall, lean, dark hat pulled low over a face browned by sun and trail dust. His coat had seen better days, but he wore it like it still carried weight. The kind of man who did not say much, but when he did, folks listened. The auctioneer blinked. 150 going once, 200, came a growl from a man with a scar running down his jaw. 250, the cowboy said again, calm as before. Harriet's chest locked tight. She could not look away from him. She did not know his name, but something in her gut told her he was not like the others. The scarred man hesitated. 300, the cowboy said, and just like that, the bidding stopped. The auctioneer slammed his hand on the platform. Sold. To the gentleman in the back, the crowd thinned fast after that. No one wanted to linger when a man paid full debt for a woman he had never met. Harriet stepped down from the platform, boots heavy in the mud, heart louder than the wind. She stopped in front of him. I do not know what you want from me, she said, voice steady. But I will work every hour of that 6 months. The cowboy looked at her then, really looked. His eyes were soft, the color of dark honey, and filled with something she had not seen in a long time, kindness. I am Weston Ellery, he said. And I did not buy you, I paid off your debt, she blinked. But why? He tilted his head, brushing a bit of dust off his sleeve. Because no one should be sold for something they did not do, her throat tightened. Still, I owe you, you do not, he said. Then his voice dropped gentler than before. You are more than enough already. She stood stunned, fingers curling into the worn fabric of her skirt. No one had ever said that to her, not even her father, who had loved her in his own quiet way. You need somewhere to go, he asked. She nodded, unable to trust her voice. I got a small spread west of town, needs a good hand, only if you want it. I can work, she said quickly. I am not afraid of hard work. I know you can, Weston said. They rode out that afternoon on his bay mare and her borrowed mule. The sun dipped low behind them, turning the sagebrush gold. Harriet sat tall in the saddle, trying not to look at him too much, but her eyes kept drifting that way. He rode easy, like a man used to the trail, but every so often he would glance her way, like he was checking she was still there. By nightfall they reached a cabin tucked into a bend of the hills. It was plain but sturdy, one chimney puffing smoke. 2 goats bleated from a nearby pen. Inside, the hearth glowed warm. Weston set about stoking it while Harriet stood awkwardly just inside the door. You hungry? He asked. I am fine. He looked at her, and something about the way he did made her feel seen all over again. I will make stew, he said, already moving toward the pot. She moved to help him, and soon they worked side by side, silent but not tense. The room smelled of onions and thyme. Her shoulders relaxed for the first time in weeks. Once the food was simmering, Weston leaned back in his chair. You got family anywhere? No, she said, just me now. He nodded, not prying. You ever work cattle? Yes. My father raised them. I can mend fence, drive herd, run a ledger. He smiled, just a little. Sounds like you are already better than half the men I have hired. They ate in quiet, the only sound the crackle of the fire. Harriet watched Weston's hands broad, capable, a small scar running across the knuckle. He had not touched her once since they left the sale yard, not even to help her mount, and still she had never felt safer. As the sky darkened, he stood. "There is a second room. It is yours." "Thank you," she said. He paused at the door. "You are not a debt. You are not a burden." His voice was quiet, but it rolled through her like thunder. That night, lying in a stranger's bed with clean sheets and a full belly, Harriet stared at the ceiling and tried to remember the last time someone had looked her in the eye and seen her as a person. Not property. Not problem, just her. And somehow it was Weston Ellery's voice she heard again before sleep took her. "You are more than enough already." The next morning broke pale and quiet over the hills, the light slow to reach the folds of land west of Cheyenne. Harriet rose before the sun had crested, the unfamiliar hush of the cabin pressing in around her. She dressed without sound, the rough wool of her skirt stiff from long wear, and stepped out into the chill. The air smelled of pine smoke and thawing earth. A few birds called low from the cottonwoods beyond the creek, and somewhere out among the brush a coyote yipped once, then fell silent. She crossed the yard toward the lean to where Weston had said he kept his tools, her breath leaving soft clouds in the morning air. He was already at the corral, shoulders bent beneath a canvas coat as he checked a length of sagging fence. His horse stood tethered nearby, tail flicking at nothing, and he looked up when she approached. "You sleep all right?" he asked, voice rough from disuse. "Well enough," she said, then added, "I didn't know if you meant for me to start right away." He nodded once, handed her a length of twine. "This gate's been loose since the thaw. You think you can hold it steady while I drive the nails?" She took her place without hesitation, bracing the post with her shoulder as he worked. The hammer rang out in even rhythm, echoing off the hills. He didn't rush, and she didn't speak. They just moved together, quiet and steady, until the job was done. When he finally stepped back, wiping his palms on his trousers, he said, "You've done this before." She glanced over. "I told you I could work. I believed you," he said. But believing and seeing aren't always the same. That startled a short breath from her, not quite a laugh, but close. She turned toward the barn, brushing hair from her cheek. "What else needs doing? There's a heifer down by the creek that's been limping, might have stepped wrong in the mud." "You up for walking fence line?" She nodded, and they set off together, boots crunching over frostbitten grass. The sun climbed a little higher as they walked, lighting the land in long gold strokes. The silence between them wasn't heavy, just wide. He didn't fill it with questions, and she didn't feel the need to explain herself. After a mile or so, he stopped beside a weathered post and pointed to a break in the wire where the ground had shifted. Snowmelts pulled it loose. "I'll grab more posts this afternoon." She crouched, testing the tension of the line. "You always do this work alone." "Most times," he said. "Hired hands come and go, but good ones are hard to find. And I don't like chasing men who don't finish what they start." Harriet stood, brushing her hands together. "I don't walk away from anything." "I didn't think you did." They kept moving. Near the creek, they found the heifer, her left hind leg tender but not broken. Weston crouched low, murmuring something under his breath as he checked her hoof. Harriet watched the way his hand moved firm but careful and how the animal stood still under his touch. "You always talk to them like that?" she asked. He looked up, grinning just a little. "Sometimes it helps more than shouting." By the time they returned to the cabin, the sun hung high and warm. Harriet rolled up her sleeves and began scrubbing the wooden table near the window. She didn't wait for Weston to ask. The rhythm of work steadied her, gave her hands something to do while her thoughts caught up with everything that had changed. He came in with an armload of kindling, set it by the hearth, then leaned against the doorframe, watching her a moment. "You want to stay," he said. It wasn't a question. She paused, cloth hanging from one hand. "I haven't made up my mind." "Fair enough," he said. "But if you do, it's not out of debt. You stay because you choose to." She turned toward him then, the light catching in the fine dust on her face. "What if I don't know what I want yet?" He nodded slowly. "Then you stay until you do." That evening they sat on the porch as the sky turned lavender and the hills softened under dusk. He whittled at a bit of cedar, and she watched the goats wander near the fence, their low bleats carrying on the breeze. After a long while she asked, "Why did you come to the sale yard?" He didn't look up from the wood. "I was there for supplies. But once I saw what was happening, I couldn't walk away. Most men did. I'm not most men." She studied the side of his face, the quiet strength in his jaw, the stillness in the way he sat. "No," she said. "You're not." They didn't speak again for some time, and when the stars came out, Harriet rose and went inside. Weston followed a few minutes later. He didn't say good night, just nodded once as he passed her room. She closed the door, heart slower now but steadier. The bed was still strange, but not unwelcome. As she lay down, the quiet didn't feel so wide. Somewhere in the dark, she let herself imagine what it might feel like to stay. Not because she had nowhere else to go, but because maybe, just maybe, she was already where she was meant to be. The first rain came 3 weeks after Harriet stepped off the wagon yard platform, and it fell quiet and steady for 2 days straight. The kind that soaked the earth deep and filled the low places with standing pools. In the fields behind the house, green began to push up through the winter-dead grass, and the creek swelled just enough to carry its voice toward the cabin. Weston had brought in extra firewood before the storm hit, stacking it neat by the hearth. By the second night, the wind had eased, and a hush settled over the land like a held breath. Inside, Harriet sat cross-legged on the floor, polishing a set of old brass bridle buckles she'd found in one of the barn bins. Weston was at the table, mending a leather cinch with needle and thread, his brow drawn low in concentration. "You ever break a horse?" she asked, not looking up. He glanced over. "I've gentled a few." "Not the same as breaking, though." "What's the difference?" "With breaking, you bend something till it gives. With gentling, you wait till it chooses not to fight anymore." She turned one of the buckles in her hand, watching the firelight catch on the worn metal. "That sounds harder." "It is," he said. "But it lasts longer." She set the buckle down. "My father never had patience for that. He said trust was a fine thing, but a rope and a strong arm were better." Weston didn't answer right away. He tied off the thread, trimmed it with his knife, and set the leather aside. Then he leaned back in his chair, arms crossed loose over his chest. "What about you?" he asked. "You believe in trust?" "I don't know yet," she said, "but I'd like to." He nodded once, then stood to stoke the fire. The log shifted, sending up a swirl of sparks. Harriet watched him move quiet, measured, never wasting a step. He didn't fill space just to fill it, and there was something about that she'd come to rely on. "I found a letter today," she said. Tucked between the floorboards in the back room. He turned, eyebrows drawn. "What kind of letter?" She reached into her apron and held it out. "From a woman, signed only with an M, dated 6 years ago." Weston took it, unfolding it carefully. His eyes moved across the page, slow and deliberate. When he finished, he folded it again and handed it back. "She was my sister," he said. Harriet blinked. "I didn't mean to, it's all right. I'd wondered where that ended up." He sat again, gaze distant now, but not closed off. "She lived here a while after our parents died. I was out working freight routes back then. She didn't stay long." "Why'd she leave?" "She wanted something different. I think maybe she was running from grief more than toward anything." He looked at Harriet then, steady. "You remind me of her." "In what way?" "She didn't wait to be rescued. She made her own way, even if it cost her." Harriet considered that, but she still wrote back. He nodded. "She wasn't proud of leaving, but she didn't regret going." Harriet folded the letter again, tucking it into her pocket. "Do you know where she is now?" "I did. Last I heard, she was married to a schoolteacher in Deadwood, had a boy, maybe 5 years old now." Harriet smiled just a little. "That's a good ending." "It is," Weston said, "but endings only come when we stop running." She looked at him closely, the line of his jaw, the quiet behind his words. "Are you still running?" He met her gaze. "Not anymore." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It held something new, unspoken, but alive between them. Harriet stood and moved to the window, watching the rain trail down the glass. "When I was little," she said, "I thought if I worked hard enough, people would stay, but they didn't, not my mother." "Not anyone." Weston stepped beside her, not near enough to touch, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "I won't leave unless you ask me to," he said. She turned her face slightly, not quite meeting his eyes. "I don't know if I'm ready for someone to stay," he nodded. "I can wait." They stood there listening to the rain soften into mist. Harriet's hand brushed the windowsill, fingertips catching on the rough grain. She didn't pull away when his hand settled lightly beside hers. He didn't reach for her. He just left it there, a quiet offer. And she left hers there too, not reaching, not retreating, just resting. Side by side, by early May, the ground had softened enough for planting. Weston brought up seed potatoes from the cellar and laid them out on the table, the dirt still clinging to their eyes. Harriet washed her hands at the basin, sleeves rolled to her elbows, and picked up a paring knife without being asked. They worked in tandem, slicing the larger tubers into pieces, each with at least one sprouting eye. The cabin filled with the faint scent of earth and starch. Outside, the breeze stirred the blue flax blooming near the fence, and the goats moved lazily in the sun. "You always plant this much?" she asked, lining cut pieces in the crate. "Most years," Weston said. "Some go to trade, some to keep." "I haven't always had someone to share them with." She glanced up, but he was still focused on the crate. "You plan to trade at the Cheyenne market, not this season." "I've got what I need here," he said, then added, "and I don't much care for the way some folks look at you." Harriet set the knife down carefully. "I can stand being looked at." "I know you can," he said, "but you shouldn't have to." They finished the cutting in silence. When the crate was full, Weston lifted it against his hip and nodded toward the field. Harriet followed him out, the sun warm on her shoulders. The soil was dark and forgiving beneath her boots, and they worked steady rows by hand, laying each piece with care, tamping soft earth over them. Halfway down the third row, Harriet paused. "You always live this quiet." "Quiet doesn't mean empty," Weston said, pushing his boot along the furrow. "I didn't say it did," she said. Then, after a breath, "I'm just not used to stillness that doesn't feel like waiting." He looked at her, soil smudged along his forearm. "What were you waiting for?" She didn't answer right away. "At first, for my father to come home sober. Later, for someone to notice I kept things running without him." Weston stood still, the breeze tugging at the edge of his collar. "Folks don't always see what's in front of them." "They saw," she said. "They just didn't think it mattered." He crouched again, planting another piece. "It matters to me." That night, after supper, Harriet sat out front with a spindle and carded wool from the last trade Weston had made with a passing Basque shepherd. The wool was coarse, but it spun steady under her fingers. Weston came out with a tin mug of coffee and passed it to her without a word. She took it, hands brushing as the mug changed hands. "When you said you used to run freight, how far did you go?" "As far west as Salt Lake." "South to Santa Fe once," he said, settling onto the porch rail. "You ever think of leaving again?" "I thought about it," he said, "but I've learned it's not the land that settles a man, it's who he stands beside." Harriet turned the spindle, watching the twist build beneath her fingers. "I don't know what it means to be stood beside." "You'll learn," he said. "If you want to." She met his eyes, then really met them. In the low light, his gaze held steady, not demanding, not offering anything more than truth, and for the first time she believed she might not have to prove her worth to keep her place. "I want to," she said. He didn't reach for her, but his voice dropped softer. "Then I'll be here when you do." The stars burned bright overhead, the kind of clear that only came after rain. Harriet kept spinning, the wool pulling thin and strong as her heartbeat slowed. Inside, the fire burned low. The cabin was quiet. And for the first time, the stillness didn't feel like waiting, it felt like peace beginning. The wheatgrass had crept halfway up Harriet's calves by late June, thick and green in the low places where the creek bent wide around Weston's pasture. The mornings came early now, the kind of light that filtered through cottonwood leaves in long, quiet streaks. She'd taken to walking the fence line with a bucket and shears, clipping wild yarrow and chamomile to dry for the pantry shelves. There was peace in its small, methodical work that asked nothing but attention. One morning, she found Weston kneeling beside the far trough, sleeves rolled to the elbow, a strip of cloth tied around one hand. "You cut yourself?" she asked, setting the bucket down. "Wire slipped," he said. Caught me when I wasn't looking. She knelt beside him, unwrapping the cloth. You didn't clean it. I was getting to it. It's already turned red. He didn't argue. Just watched while she dipped a clean rag into the trough, wrung it out, and pressed it firm to the wound. His skin was warm beneath her fingers, rough from sun and work. He didn't flinch. Doesn't look deep, she said, but you'll keep it wrapped. He gave a small nod. You always this sure with things? Only when I know what I'm doing. She folded another strip of linen from her apron pocket and tied it snug around his palm. When she looked up, his eyes were on her, not searching, just resting. I'd trust you with more than my hand, he said. She stood quickly, brushing her skirt. It'll need changing in the evening. I'll be here. That night, after the chores and supper, she sat on the porch steps with her knees drawn up, watching the fireflies blink along the edge of the field. Weston came out with a tin box in one hand and a thick sheaf of papers in the other. I've got something, he said. She turned, puzzled. What is it? Ledger papers. From the last few years. I never kept them in order. Figured you might know how to straighten them. She took the bundle, flipping through the handwritten columns. You've been writing it all out yourself, when I had to. She looked up at him, surprised. You trust me with your accounts. I'd trust you to run the place if I went blind tomorrow. She studied him in the fading light. That's not a small thing. I know what I say when I say it. They didn't speak for a while after that. She sorted slowly, setting the pages into neat piles, the numbers familiar and grounding. When her fingers brushed the last sheet, she hesitated. This one's dated last spring, she said. You stopped writing after that. He leaned forward, arms on his knees. That's when I started thinking about selling it. She looked up sharply. Selling the ranch? I didn't see much use in keeping it. I'd been alone too long. Couldn't see past the next season, and now I see you. The wind shifted in the grass, carrying the scent of sun-warmed hay. Harriet placed the pages back in the tin one by one. When she closed the lid, she held it in her lap a moment before looking back at him. You still think of leaving? No, he said. I think of building, if you're willing. Her voice caught in her throat. I never thought I'd be asked. I'm not asking out of debt, he said. I'm asking because when I wake up, I listen for you. Because every time you walk through a door, the room feels steadier. She stood slowly, setting the tin aside. Then I'll stay. Not because I have nowhere else, but because I want to be here. With you. He rose too, and for a long moment neither moved. Then Harriet stepped forward and Weston met her halfway, his hand finding hers as naturally as if it had always known where to land. She brought her other hand to his chest, feeling the rhythm beneath his shirt sure and calm. When he kissed her, it was quiet and certain, like the first drop of rain after a long drought. No rush, no question. Just the kind of knowing that settles deep and roots itself without needing to be spoken. That night she slept with the cabin window open, the breeze curling in over the sill. And when she woke, his coat hung beside hers on the peg by the door, and his boots stood neat beside hers. They were no longer two people passing through each other's lives. They were joined not by need, but by choice. The following spring, the land bloomed early, and so did the garden Harriet had built along the southern slope. She stitched calico into curtains for the front room and lined the shelves with glass jars packed tight with dried herbs and pickled greens. Weston built a second barn before the rains came and traded a yearling for a pair of milk cows. At night they read aloud by the hearth, Weston slow and careful with the words, Harriet correcting gently when he stumbled. He never minded. Each mistake was just another step closer to her voice. When the first child came, a boy with Weston's eyes and Harriet's quiet gaze, he was born in the back room with the windows thrown open to the sound of larks in the trees. They named him Ellis, after no one in particular, just a name that felt like beginning. Years passed and the world turned, but the cabin remained, settled into the earth like it had always belonged there. And so did they together. By hand and by heart, they built something that could not be taken or sold or broken, something that would last.